Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Symposium. I'd like to start by thanking the University, and particularly the Centre for Criminal Justice and Criminology, for hosting this event and paying for the coffee, which is always well appreciated, especially in times of austerity when citizens can't afford to do that. We're going to have a range of presentations this afternoon. The theme is very much around that early part of substance misuse strategy around Tier 1 information and education, and particularly some of the work that we've been doing in Swansea now over a number of years, which tries to tie in practice and research to look at how we also inform some of the policy agendas and collectively how we try to ensure that we give as much protection to young people as we can. Protecting young people from the harm of substance misuse, that is a policy of Welsh Government. It's also one of those articles within the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is starting to drive policy towards young people across the whole agenda in Wales. And so it's one that we really do have to pay significant attention to. And I think the thing about substance misuse, whilst it might seem sometimes that it's one of those things that is most located within areas of deprivation, people who may not have as much investment in society, I think our experience from substance misuse action team is that it's very clearly not the case. That this is an issue which can affect any family at any time. And that young people in adolescence are particularly at risk simply because they're adolescents and they take risky choices and make risky behaviours almost a speciality. And I think if those of us who are adults in the room cast our minds back far enough, and in my case that's quite a long time, we know that we all take those risky behaviours. It is, without any shadow of doubt, an improvement in Wales, so the English strategy that we have adopted both substance misuse and alcohol as the focus, and we'll hear today some of the research which is looking at the onset and prevalence of use. We'll be looking at presentations about what schools can do and have done within Swansea area to help themselves. And we're going to be hearing from Jamie about the work that the place is doing as Swansea's specialist and dedicated service for children and young people, now co-located in information with a clear view to destigmatising the whole issue of substance misuse and enabling young people and parents to be able to take advantage of the best information and support and, when necessary, treatment that we can muster. I think we've got Vicky's not going. We have one of our presenters actually missing at the moment, which means that I'm going to sub the first bit. So I'm going to be Vicky Carlisle, I call for it. And that means I'm going to very rapidly push this across, and we will save some time, because down here we've got Julian and two pupils from Olchfa who've been involved in delivering this programme. So all I'm going to do is give a little bit of background to where this comes from and what it actually is. HYPE is helping young people through peer education. And as a method, its genesis is quite interesting. We picked it up, or stole it I should say, from Merthyr Tydfil, where the police had invested significantly in developing a programme of intervention within the local comprehensives that enabled young people to play a role as participants, as part of the solution, not seen as being the problem, as we too often do. They in turn picked it up from Thames Valley Police, and when we looked at the original model was somewhat scary because it involved role play where young people would play the part of victims of drugs crimes and various other things which involved them being tied to seats and all sorts of strange activities. So we took it apart and we restructured it, and the whole premise was that in the 90s we had had a series of youth conferences running through Swansea, and young people coming to those conferences year after year had been challenged by us to select issues which were of significance to them, things that they wanted to work on across the following year. And the thing that came up most frequently after dealing with bullying and dealing with racism from substance misuse. But there was a general feeling amongst those people involved in the agencies that it was a difficult, a wicked issue that was rather dangerous to enable young people to participate in. So we had to find a way in which we could safely create the conditions in which young people could play a constructive role. We also knew from some of the research that had been done, particularly the stuff out in North America, that where there was research looking at drugs education, it tended to focus on the fact that education provided by young people to young people seemed to have a longer term effect than that which was done by adults to young people. And it may just be that some of those issues of social and cultural interchange were really the key issues behind that. But anyway, we boldly set off and we persuaded a few schools to join us, one of which was Olchfa, another was Penland. I can't remember the others, Petra Havard, and Goya. And we trained pupils, we took them away on residentials for 2-3 day blocks, and the whole purpose of the residential training was to do two things. One was to provide them with the knowledge of substance misuse, and the second was to start the process of enabling them to teach, and then combining the two elements. They would go back into their schools and they would provide at least 2 lessons to younger age children within their schools. And so that was the sort of basic model that we created for HYPE. It has evolved and it has created significant change over time. And we are still in the process of evolving and changing HYPE. Having said that, I think we are confident, and there will be some echoes to this happening throughout today's presentations, that enabling young people to be participant in this field is a very critical and significant move. I think I've probably said enough about background, and I'd like to welcome now Julian Kennedy, and Julian will do the rest of the introducing and presenting.
There we are. Thanks, David. Okay, just to introduce myself, I'm Julian Kennedy. I'm an assistant head at Olchfa School, and I'm responsible for all aspects of what's called well-being. So in a school context, that's everything from discipline through to pastoral support and guidance, healthcare plans, but also things like pupil voice, pupil involvement, etc. It's quite a wide remit that I have within school. And I've been asked to talk about HYPE and Olchfa School, about how we operate HYPE and about the impact that it's beginning to have with pupils. I do want to say from the start, it's not my job to say you must do it this way or this is the best way to do it or anything else. This is the way that's worked for us. And one thing I'll come back to afterwards is one of the beauties of the HYPE approach, I think, is that schools have got the flexibility to be able to adapt it to their own particular dynamics and ethos. So this is how we're doing it at Olchfa, but it's not the way it must be done. It's not, the absolute Bible on HYPE. To begin with, for those who are not sure, I'm sure this is working. Okay. Just to set us in context, some of you will know us, some of you won't. We're a comprehensive school in the west of Swansea. If you're from Swansea, people mention Olchfa, you'll very often get, a posh school. Okay? Well, we're not a posh school necessarily. And for the benefit of Nino up at the back there, I appreciate not a headline saying Olchfa officially not posh. That would be great. We've got 1,900 on roll, 500 in the sixth form. Around 20% of our pupils are outside catchment. Okay? And that's across Swansea. We're drawing in from right across Swansea. Some of them are travelling right across from east to west. I've got this up and running. Thank you. 9% eligible for free meals. That is well below the Welsh average, as you're probably aware. But we do have a catchment, which is in the bottom 20% of wards in Wales, according to the Welsh Index of Welsh Multiple Index of Deprivation. So what, you might say? Well, what does it matter? I would agree with what Eddie said earlier. It's not just about certain schools having eligibility for good quality drug education, or certain pupils, or targeting certain areas. Clearly, some services are going to be targeted to particular areas. We all understand that. But I believe really, really strongly that all pupils in Wales are entitled to good quality education. It shouldn't be determined by a preconceived notion of what is a good school or not a good school, or what's an area of drug problems or anything else. All pupils are entitled to have access to a quality education. This is the thing I was talking about earlier with hype. All schools have got their own ethos. The way that we do things on a whole host of fronts at Olchfa is different even to Bishop Gore, which is just down the road from us, is different to Gallatin, which is our nearest school the other direction, is different to all the other schools. And equally, the way we do things at Olchfa might well be different to how they do it in RCT or Cardiff or anywhere else. And that's fine. Hype gives you the opportunity and the capacity to be able to adapt what you do depending on your own dynamic and the own ethos within your school. And I think that's really important. Because if you try and take something which is rigid and which can't be adapted, and you try and parachute that into a school, it won't work. Okay? Schools have to be able to adapt things to the way that they operate, and you'll see later on, I think it's really important in the current climate that schools are able to adapt things in a way which will allow them to show a measurable impact for reasons I'll come back to. If you're talking about setting up hype in a school, or if you're talking about advising people, if you're a PSE coordinator, you're somebody who's going into schools to talk about the hype process, this would be my experience of the essential first steps that you need to be taking. First of all, you've got to accept the need for education on substance misuse. You might well think, well, it's in the law, everyone's got to do it, of course we would do that. You would think that's common sense. But without naming any names, I'm aware of teachers, not actually from within the county, but from other schools, who I've been to conferences on and things, they say, well, we don't have any drug use in our school. And they're just having a laugh, to be frank with you. Every school has got issues surrounding drug use, because it's young people, and every school very definitely has got a need for education on it. Okay? We've got a duty to make sure that our young people are informed, and that applies to every single school and every context. Secondly, and this is important as well, you've got to recognise that peer education is a valid part of what you're seeking to do within your PhD programme. Okay? Now, you might well have a debate within your school, and you might say that's not really for us. Okay? The idea of having older pupils teaching younger pupils, the idea of having older pupils sharing experiences with younger pupils, the idea of older pupils giving factual information to young pupils about substance misuse, you might say that's not what we're about at school. And that's fine. But it is an absolute first step. It is a crucial first step. You need to get your PSE coordinator on board, you need to get your senior management team on board, and you need to accept as a principle that peer education is one of the tools which you can use. Now, one advantage, and we'll revisit this after, is that Estin these days is expecting schools to take peer education on board as part of what schools should be delivering. Not just within PSE, but across a whole range of subjects. So that is a fairly straightforward thing to get on board, but again, crucial. This is important as well. You have to secure the agreement with your governing body. Governing bodies, in many respects, are the publicly accountable part of a school. And they need to accept the idea that you're doing something which is relatively controversial. Okay? The idea of using young people to talk about drugs with younger people again is a fairly controversial idea. It's a fairly radical idea. We're very fortunate our governing body are very much behind what we're seeking to do. Eddie's been on our governing body in the past as well, and we've been in the position where we've been able to get the governing body to accept what we're doing. But that is crucial, because if the governing body's not going to back it, it won't work. You won't even be able to get it up and running. Working in partnership with the HYPE team, I'll revisit this afterwards, but it is really important to stress that HYPE is a partnership. And it's not just a partnership between us and the professional deliverers. You're working alongside other schools as well. You might train alongside another school, you'll certainly attend meetings alongside other schools and share experiences and practices. And that's really crucial. Identifying key staff and pupils within the school, again, is vital. Okay? PSE coordinator, whoever's in charge of well-being in the school. Have you got pupils who are confident and are trained in delivery and are happy to deliver? Have you got year groups that are receptive to this? These things are absolutely vital, and I'll be very pleased afterwards to introduce our HYPE deliverers to you, and they can give you their experience of working within Olchfa. So those are the first steps I think are really crucial. Key principle. I think schools face a real quandary. Okay? First of all, we are uniquely placed for access to young people, for obvious reasons. A young person in a typical year, provided they attend school, etc., is going to approach a majority of their time in a year spent within school, if you leave sleeping out of the picture. Okay? Some of them incorporate the two. Yeah, indeed, yeah, I'm speaking in the ideal place for that. Okay? And all the research shows that in addition to the physical time that you have with pupils, schools have a relationship with pupils that is not replicated elsewhere, for obvious reasons. Pupils might well respond to authority figures in school in a better way than they respond to ones elsewhere. Not automatically, but they might well do. Even the most tricky pupils in schools have usually got some members of staff that they get on with and they can identify with, etc. And there are relationships built up between families and schools over many, many years often, which you can use to your advantage. So schools are well placed, and everybody knows that. The problem is, everybody wants access to us. Everybody wants 5 minutes of your time. Everybody wants to come in and deliver this during PSE. Everybody wants to deliver that during PSE. Okay? The Welsh Assembly has got things that it wants to be doing. And it's virtually every week you hear somebody saying, there's a problem with young people in society, what do the schools do about it? Now that's fine, that's the territory we operate in. It's like a fisherman complaining about the waves in some cases. But you've got to make sure that this works for you as a school, because you cannot give in to every single request that people might come up with. You haven't got the time to do it. Okay? So what schools need to do, and this is a particular issue within PSC, they've got to ensure that any additionality, any outside agency intervention, any new approach that you take works for you. Okay? You've got to make sure, if you're going to sell it to your governing body, your senior leadership team and everything else, you've got to make sure that you can demonstrate that this will take place and this will be the impact that it has on pupils and this is why we should do it. You need to be able to do a resource, a cost-benefit analysis. You need to be able to say, right, it's going to cost us this much in staff time and in pupil time, but that will be the benefit that arises. Okay? And I would recommend to anybody at all who's operating in a school context or wanting to get into a school context, whatever service it is that you're looking to do within schools, try your hardest to show that you can give them a service that will allow them to demonstrate a measurable impact upon pupils. Because increasingly with schools, and I'll revisit this when I look at STIN afterwards, we've been asked to demonstrate the impact of what we're doing. If we want to get through an STIN inspection, we've got to say, okay, this is what we did, and this is the impact that it had upon pupils, outcomes, standards, etc. And that's just the reality of it. Okay? So if you're looking to get into schools, you really need to ensure that you're pitching in such a way that you can show impact on standards and outcomes for pupils. And in many respects, that's quite right, because I feel really strongly about everything in schools. Unless it has a direct and beneficial impact on young people, we shouldn't be doing it. Okay? Anything else that's coming in that people say is great, it's this, it's this, it's this. No, unless it's impacting positively on pupils, schools shouldn't be doing it, because that's what we're there to do, is to improve life chances for young people. Okay, how HYPE is organised at Olchfa. I'm going to bring in our two students in a sec. We draw a selection of our HYPE counsellors, our HYPE deliverers, from what we call our chat counsellors. Chat is a service which we offer, a peer counselling service, which stands for confidentiality, honesty, advice and trust. And these are students that we use, drawn from year 10 and from year 11, who work with year 7 pupils and year 8 pupils to mediate disputes, to work on relationships with informed groups, to operate a chat room that students can come in and listen, have their voice heard, and they are a part of my pastoral support team, and very, very valuable they are too. We choose from the chat counsellors because they've already got experience of working with young people, they've got credibility within our school, they are recognised as being people that you can put trust in, and they've got skills in delivery and so forth. Now, not everybody can draw from that type of group, but you want people with that type of skill. You want to identify a cohort of students who've got credibility, who are listened to by other pupils, and are confident in delivering, and also prepared to put the time in. They're trained off-site, okay? And that's really, really crucial for us. There are fewer distractions if you train students off-site. A guarantee of the students are on-site, a teacher will want their time, a teacher will want to take some of the other teachers' time away, etc. Crucial. It gives it higher status as well. Okay? Things that you do in school, fantastic, but if you really want the students on board with HYPE, and you want the students who are going to deliver HYPE to really believe in it themselves, take them off-site, give them a special experience at the Liberty Stadium, wherever it might be, residential if you can afford to do it, you can spare the staff time, but give it status, because if they perceive it to have status, they will deliver it with a higher level. It's a bit of a balancing act as well. The young people we're working with, Oliver and last year with us today, they've got their commitments as well. You know, they've got GCSEs on the go, Could be A-levels if you're working with older groups and so forth. And many of the best students that you want for delivering with chat and with hype will have other things going on in their lives outside school as well. So you've got to balance it very carefully. You've got to be respectful that the students are giving up their time, and you've got to make it effective for them. And the way that we deliver in Olchfa, as Eddie touched on, is we prepare and deliver 2 lessons to Year 8 students which are integrated within the PSE programme. Okay? Now, the integrated part is really crucial there, I think. If you try and put hype as a standalone thing that's not connected to PSE, students will go along, they'll sit there, they'll listen to it, and they'll walk out afterwards, and they'll think, great, I miss maths. Okay? It needs to be a part of your PSE programme, and your PSE programme needs to be integrated and a serious part of what you're about at school. The old days of PSE, where you would look around at the end after you finished timetabling and put in whoever was left, whoever had a free to teach PSE, those days have gone, quite rightly. PSE needs to be integrated within your schemes of work within school, and hype has to be an integral part of that. The other thing I think is really important is that hype cannot be the only substance misuse education that you have. Okay? It needs to be part of a wider approach, which includes things like involvement from the police or the youth offending team, which might involve access to certain websites and so forth. It needs to be part of a wider programme. But if you're going to work with it, that would be what I would strongly recommend. At this stage, I'm going to hand over to Lassie and Oliver. Lassie and Oliver are in Year 12 with us currently, and they were part of last year's chat cohort. And they very kindly agreed to talk a little bit about their experience of preparing and delivering hype at Olchfa.
Well, my name's Lassie.
And I'm Oliver. We've been asked by Mr. Kennedy to reflect on our experiences of working with the Hype project when we're in Olchfa in Year 11.
We're going to focus on 3 main areas, and then we'll be happy to take any questions which you may have at the end.
Training and preparation were vital to the success of the Hype project. Hype's approach is not to spoon-feed the information, but rather to promote independent learning and using our own information as well as the information that's given to us. This allows us to tweak the presentation to our own strengths and the way that we think we best present information to young people. Hype preparation is also very different to the way we learn in school. We're learning from those with first-hand experiences, such as the police, meaning that they can share their own experiences with us and that we have the ability to ask any questions we feel at the end. We're also, rather than being just to retain information ourselves like we are in school, we're being taught to teach others. Once the training was completed and we were back in school, we were supported by staff but encouraged to take ownership of our own presentation. We had the flexibility to choose from a range of strategies and activities to suit the way we like to present and the way we think that the age group will most benefit from.
So then once we made our presentations, it's the delivery stage, and we found that we benefited from already being chat counsellors because we'd already had training in working with younger pupils and adapting to different situations. So I think that was useful to us. And we also felt that we benefited from being close in age to the pupils because we could remember what we enjoyed when we did it and what we'd like if it was us, if it wasn't that long ago. Our PSE lessons, the first one was on substances in general, and then the second one was on cannabis and alcohol. And our approach was to provide facts and promote understanding, but not to sit in judgment. And we think that this worked because the pupils seemed more relaxed with us than they may have been with teachers. And we generated lots of stories and questions, and definitely a lot of interest from the pupils. And we also felt that we generated their enthusiasm and enjoyment for the lessons.
There are a number of benefits to both pupils and to the Hype team presented. One of them is a very open process, and we felt that the pupils were more open with us than they would have been with teachers as we were close to their age group. They also had the ability to discuss more awkward topics which they wouldn't have wanted to with teachers.
And for us, we felt we benefited because it definitely increased our confidence and also our own awareness of the issues around substance misuse, and it also allowed us to act on our own initiative, and we would do it again, and I would recommend it. Thank you as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm embarrassed to know as well. Last year and Oliver were fantastic leaders, I have to say, as were all of the teams. They were a very strong year group that year with chat, and Hype benefited from that. Just to pick up on what they've said there, something I think is really, really crucial. They talk about taking ownership of that, and I know we've all seen plenty of management speak where ownership crops up. I see it in half a dozen documents a day probably. but it is really, really pivotal. There is no point in having peer educators and teachers doing all the work and preparing all the materials and say, go on, just deliver that for me. Right? That's our job. The purpose of HYPE and the approach that HYPE takes is to get young people to think about the way in which they can engage with young people. And it's really vital in that respect. We can show them a range of different approaches. We can give advice and guidance, but it's crucial that the HYPE counsellors decide themselves what it is that they would like to teach and how they're going to deliver that. And just to touch on, they talked about the two lessons they did, one on substance misuse generally and the other on cannabis and alcohol. That ties in with the partnership we have with the university and with Rachel's work. Because anecdotally, our experience within school would be that the issues that we face around substance misuse would tend to centre on tobacco, although that's not that popular these days, and cannabis and alcohol being the other two major ones. We have occasional issues with other substances, but primarily those are the issues that we would experience with students. That ties in with the study that Rachel has done, so we've got a longitudinal research base to suggest that our hunches are correct. And the students themselves, the HYPE counsellors, when we ask them, would identify those as the prime areas that they think our students need education on. So it is really crucial that this is kind of ground up, if you like, that the students are deciding for themselves what they would like to discuss and the approach that they would like to take. Now, this is the crucial bit, I think, for schools, how to make it work for you. Okay? Like I said earlier, everybody wants a slice of the action in schools. Everybody wants 5 minutes of school's time. What HYPE allows you to do is to demonstrate an impact upon students. And I think that's really crucial. If you're going to sell anything to schools, please, please, please demonstrate the impact they can have on outcomes and standards. Now, there is dual purpose in school education. And again, I'm teaching my grandma to suck eggs, so we all know this. HYPE obviously fits with the concept of holistic education, shaping informed and educated citizens. It's got a clear role to do with that. But the thing that we're increasingly getting measured on is this idea of standards. Schools have got a duty to demonstrate that we're having a measurable impact upon young people, and whatever we do has got to try and demonstrate an impact upon standards and outcomes. Now, you might like that or not. You might think, oh, wasn't it better 25 years ago when schools could do whatever they liked and they weren't being measured, etc. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. This is where we are today. If you're going to sell something to a school, you're going to get a school on board with you, you need to show that you can have a measurable impact upon standards, because the schools are putting the resource in, they're going to want that impact upon standards to be demonstrated. And I think HYPE is excellent for that. In the ESTIN Common Inspection Framework, which a lot of you will be familiar with, well-being is the obvious measure that we can use. The black measure there is the overarching measure, which is attitudes towards keeping healthy and safe, and then the blue ones are the subsets. HYPE allows us to demonstrate participation, enjoyment in learning, community involvement and decision-making, social and life skills. So I'm able, when I'm writing a self-evaluation document, to say to ESTIN, this is what we're doing, and it hits this measure, this measure, this measure. And that's crucial for you. If you're looking to get into schools, please, please have a look at the ESTIN Common Inspection Framework and sell it to schools. I think you could have an impact on this. Okay? Additionally, we are expected to look at learning experiences, meeting the needs of learners, employers, community. HYPE obviously fits very well with that. Teaching, range and quality of teaching approaches. Primarily, clearly, that's about teachers. But we're able to say, yeah, well, in addition to what we're doing with teachers, we've also got peer educators at work. And it allows us to hit that measure. Care, support and guidance, provision for health and well-being, specialist services, information and guidance. We are able to say, through the work of HYPE, that this is what we're doing, hitting these measures, and so on. Now, even that is not quite enough. I'll just put one other thing up very quickly. The other thing that's kind of, people talk about is kind of soft measures, as they call them in school. We will never know, because it's unquantifiable, how effective PSE is in retaining pupils within education, ensuring that pupils go through to the end of year 11, ensuring they don't drop out of school at the end of year 10. Okay? All we can really do there is to demonstrate that we've got these things going on, and here's our attendance and retention figures. And HYPE allows us to contribute towards those so-called soft measures. Now, one real advantage of the HYPE approach and the partnership with the university is that because through our involvement with HYPE, we've been able to be involved in a longitudinal study. So we've got a research base where we can actually begin to demonstrate impact upon pupils. Rachel from the university has been involved in 3 or 4 years now, I think, isn't it, with the school, 4 years, and we're able to access data and reports looking at changes and trends that have emerged within school and compare them with trends across the county. That allows us to demonstrate impact. Okay? We went through inspection in May 2011, and the inspectors, and I don't blame them for this, this is the job that they do as well, they were pretty much openly saying, okay, yeah, you told me what you're doing, you told me what you're doing, it's lovely, fantastic. Where's your evidence? Where's your evidence that you've actually had an impact upon students? And that's the climate that schools are operating in these days. Okay? We've got to demonstrate the impact, and HYPE allows us to do it. Okay? This is a selected graph that I gave with the inspectors, and this is part of a presentation which I gave with them, which allowed us to be written up as a case study of good practice. This is one of Rachel's figures. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Rachel. This was for 2008, 2009, 10. This is the latest set of figures I had before the inspection. It worked very nicely for me, in which you can see across Swansea an increase there of 3% in terms of reported substance use. For the same period within Olchfa, we could demonstrate there that first a 6% fall in that reported substance use across the same period. Now, we could go and we can pick any number of stats and use one to counter the other, of course we can. But what we're doing here, and what HYPE allowed us to do, and Rachel's study allowed us to do, was to demonstrate that we were having an impact with students. And that, I have to say, was the type of thing that Eston were looking for. They didn't want us just to say we believe, we think. They wanted to say, where is your evidence? And this approach allowed us to do that. This was Eston's verdict on what we're doing, and I have to say, I'm not just driven totally by Eston. There's a big part of me that thinks, actually, we're going to do what's right for pupils, and if Eston like it, we'll be better. But the reality is, I mean, the senior managers at the school, I've got a duty to ensure that the school is delivering to the standards it's expected to, and so I have to think about Eston. It's just how it is. Okay? And this is what they said about us. HYPE is specifically mentioned as being particularly effective and having a very positive impact on pupils' well-being. And there was a case study of best practice written up there, which is on the Eston website if any of you like to access it. If you go to Eston's website, for the search box, if you put in HYPE there, it will take you to the case study of best practice, which also covers the chat counsellors that we do in school. I should say with that, Eston asked us to write that, and then they sub-edited it themselves. So it has got an appalling pun there. It says, forget the hype and chat about it, or something along those lines. And I please dissociate myself from that. That is their sub-editing rather than mine. So just to sum up, in conclusion, these are the things you're going to be doing. Okay? Secure the agreement of all the relevant parties, particularly your governing body. Adapt HYPE to your needs, ethos and dynamics. That's the beauty of it. Okay? Adapt it to how it operates in your school. If you've got particularly good staff that you want to work with HYPE, get them in. Okay? If you've got a particularly good group of pupils, get them in. If you want to do it with Year 7 because you think drug issues are arising earlier than Year 8, that's up to you. Adapt it to the dynamics that you have within your school. Recognise it's only one part of your overall programme. Okay? And that's not to dismiss HYPE in any way, that's actually to strengthen it. As I said earlier, if you do it as a standalone thing, the kids will go in our school in particular, they'll go in, they'll sit there, they'll listen to it, they'll say, fantastic, thanks very much. They'll clap at the end and they'll walk out and it won't have any impact at all. It's got to be a part of your overall programme and put it alongside more traditional methodologies. Demonstrate links to standards and outcomes. I hope I've tried to show you the importance of that. And that's what we've done. Yes, yeah, I was just going to say.
Julie's going to be taking our young people back home, so I think we have intended to hold questions to the end and to have a sort of question time there. We're hoping to get back, but this is Gridlock City, so just in case it doesn't, if there are any really burning questions either for our young people who've been HYPE from chat counsellors and presenters, or for Julian, from Secretary.
Do you have a rolling programme for training youngsters as well? Because obviously these people, the youngsters who are moving on to university, they're going to have to be replaced. Do you have a rolling programme of training for that to happen?
Yeah, and in fairness, that's where Vicky comes in as well. We're adopting the same principles that we're going to draw from our chat counsellors each year. So the chat counsellors, we have a cohort of about 20, 22, depending on the quality of students, drawn from Year 10. And we will train them in the things which we like to do with chat and mediation techniques, etc., etc. So we've got a cohort we're training within school who are peer counsellors, and then Vicky's team organises external training so that each cohort will be externally trained. So we're building up a body of students. But the advantage we have as well is that because we're a post-16 service, we've still got our hyper counsellors in year 12 and 13 as well. We can draw if we need to. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing.
Thank you.
What
Yes.
do you do to meet the emotional needs of the young people that you're dealing with? Because substance misuse isn't always about just recreational, the emotional needs there. How do you meet those emotional needs?
Through hype, or how do we meet the emotional needs generally within school?
Well, through how generally.
Okay. Being honest, the hype will be a kind of a bit of an early warning system for us in some respects, because what we've found is that students who've been through not just the hype program in fairness, but the general PSE drug and substance misuse education we do, very often that will trigger pupils to come and speak to my team. Within school, we've got a team of pastoral guidance workers which we use, one for each key stage, alongside learning leaders, SMAT as it used to be called. We have in-house counselling through the exchange, which is hosted within school and which we can refer or to which pupils can self-refer. I've got, within my team, they've all gone on substance misuse and things like emotional first aid training, etc. So we've got in-house expertise that we can put in place to work alongside pupils. If that's not working as well as it might do, then we make referrals to the police, make referrals to the GP, whatever it might be. We have the team coming down from Travel, the outreach workers coming down to us on a monthly basis to have a drop-in. We've got people coming to school with us and can work with pupils as well. We have East and Mean coming into school as well, so we can access pupils from different ethnic backgrounds as well. So we've got a whole host of services which we can put in place to complement the education, because being frank, the PSE side of things is factual based and so on. It's not, the classrooms are not the place where people are going to stand up and say, you know, I've got drug issues and I need help with them. The idea really is to give them information, to get them informed, and then from that hopefully they'll come and access the services that we offer. But that I feel really strongly is a much wider thing within the schools. The schools have got to be able to create an environment in which pupils feel that they can come and speak in confidence within the limits of the confidentiality that we have, and also that they can be listened to and taken seriously. And I feel really strongly, and I say with all of my team, it's not our place as a school to make any moral judgments about drug use or substance misuse, or if people are affected by it through parents or anything else. Our job begins and ends at supporting pupils to ensure that they're retaining in the education system. There are other agencies that we can work alongside for wider things within their life, but we as a school can't solve all the issues that pupils bring to us. Our job is to support pupils so that they can remain within education in a very wider sense. So we operate on the basis of not making judgments, just on the basis of offering the support that pupils need.
Which seems like a nice segue into this document before we move on, which is the draft guidance for substance misuse education. Went to consultation in July, finished in September. It's still on Welsh Government's consultation website, so anybody who wants to have a look at the most up-to-date information about how they perceive the Welsh Government delivery of substance misuse education in schools, this document is it. And what it says is exactly what Julian has just described now. It's not the responsibility of the school in isolation, it's the responsibility being owned within the school and the whole task being shared with all of those organisations within the local authority area that can actually contribute. And it's about teamwork.
Very much so.
And it's about making kids safe. And I think that's the critical element that we've seen in all of the schools that have taken Hive on, is that there's been a great deal of attention to making sure that for those who do the training to provide the education, taking your point that step further, they will be identified by pupils who may have things that they want to say outside the classroom. So it's really critically important that those young people participating in this have access to trained adults, and that it's geared into a point of us thinking about safety of everybody involved in this.
Any other questions?
thing into awareness. So say you have the year 8 that comes to one of your hype teams and explain that they have the experience of some sort of drugs. You just don't remember about confidentiality yet. Do you break that and tell their parents?
It's a tricky one. There's a balancing act to be drawn there. First of all, it's important to recognise that pupils are not entitled to absolute confidentiality, okay, in any situation. Because if they are going to describe behaviour to you which is going to put them at risk of significant harm, etc., then that kicks into a duty of care. So all of my team are trained, including the chat counsellors as well, are trained that if they're getting into the realms of certainly what you might call a child protection disclosure, but even if you get into the realms of something which is going beyond, so-and-so had a joint the other week one. So when you start to get into serious territory, I ask the team to stop formally, as it were, and say to the person speaking with them, do you understand that I can't necessarily keep this confidential? So they give the pupils an opportunity to retract at that stage. Now, in my experience, I've done this many times with pupils that I've never once known a student who doesn't want to keep talking, because the very fact that they're approaching you demonstrates that they want to talk about something. Once they've made that, if they continue to proceed, whoever they're speaking to on this matter will then listen to them, offer advice and so on, will then bring it to me. And we have to make a judgment there about duty of care. Typically, the approach that we would take would be to encourage pupils to discuss it with their parents that night, or their carers, whoever looks after them, and to ask the parents to come and discuss it with us. Okay? Now that doesn't happen every single time, and I'll come on to the context now in a sec. So the parents then contact us, that way we know a conversation has happened. Okay? We are conscious that in doing that, you run the risk of pupils never coming forward because they think they're always going to it's always going to get back to their parents and so on. It does depend on the age of the pupils. You mentioned a year 8 pupil. Being frank with you, I had a year 8 pupil, I would be more inclined to get in touch with parents and discuss it. Okay? But I would want to do that with the pupil's consent. If you're talking about pupils at the higher end of the age range, then it may well be more appropriate to be making external referrals to other agencies and so forth. Okay? But it's all about the individual. I can't say there is a fixed thing that we will definitely do, because it does depend on the age of the pupil. Okay? It is my experience that overwhelmingly it is always better if pupils have shared this with parents. There's no shadow of a doubt about that. I can't speak for other schools, but I can say that very strongly with ours. And on the times where I have run home, I've only ever encountered one situation in which the parents didn't already have some concerns that they're keeping to themselves. Parents don't fall off their chair in surprise to find that their son or daughter has been engaging with whatever it might be, okay? Because they've often had those concerns. And that's why I think the crucial thing to bring in is this idea that we don't make a moral judgment. It's not our place to say your son or daughter has done a bad thing, okay? It's our place to say this is the information they've shared with us. Come in, sit with us, how can we work on this together? Okay? Because it doesn't work otherwise. And I think once pupils accept that that's, and it's really crucial you've got a trusting atmosphere within school. And I hope we have. The evidence suggests that we have. Once pupils accept that what you say you're going to do is what you're going to do, and once you've got that trust, then after that things become a lot easier. Now there are exceptions to that, to be frank with you, and an obvious one is the exchange counsellors that are with us. Exchange have got a contract with the Welsh Assembly to work within schools on a counselling basis. And when pupils are working with exchange counsellors, that is entirely confidential between them and the exchange counsellors. We host the service, but we don't find out what they're saying with the counsellors, nor do we wish to. Okay? The only exception, again, is if it goes into a child protection concern, which obviously I've got a legal duty to ensure that I deal with effectively. So if exchange counsellors receive anything of a child protection nature, they would bring that to me. Everything else is confidential between them and the exchange counsellors. So, and the students know that exchange is a confidential service. So if we have a student who wishes to get advice and help, but absolutely does not wish to share it beyond share it with their family, then it will be the exchange that would normally self-refer to from their liver dropping clinic kind of screening thing. So it's a bit of a balancing act. to me, the most important thing is establishing a trusting atmosphere within school and speaking frankly with students. There's no point promising confidentiality because you can't maintain it, and it's not in the best interest of pupils necessarily, but there are judgments. Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you again.
Thank you very much. Just to say quickly, if anybody wishes to have a copy of that, please get in touch with the email address here. I'm happy to send it out if anybody wishes.
Right. We are, as you can tell, filming the event, and the intention will be to load the presentations and the film so that we can stream this, hopefully through those arrangements done. If people have signed in, put their emails on, that information will come to you. Okay, now we're moving on to our second presentation, which is to look in a little bit more detail at the research which Julian has already mentioned. Rachel, and Kevin.
Thank you. My name's Kevin Haines. I'm Professor of Criminology and Youth Justice and the Director of the Centre for Criminal Justice and Criminology, and this is hiding behind me is Rachel Evans, who's a doctoral student who, as Julian has already said, does all the work and I just take all the glory. That's just how it should be, isn't it? We work on this project very much. I've got to move over here, right? I've got to move over here. We work on this project very much in partnership with colleagues in the SMAT and in schools and with the young people that take part in the research. I mean, I think as Julian was emphasising the partnership element of this, we see that as being absolutely crucial to the kind of contribution that we can make to this process. And also, you know, holding events like this where we can begin to publicise and promote the kind of work that we're doing. We think this is an important part of developing that partnership, engaging wider partners within this process. And in that respect, I'm really pleased to see so many of you here today. Some familiar faces, some students have sneaked in as well. They're allowed to do that. But also, I mean, lots of faces I've never seen before, so it's a real pleasure to see you here. And we've got a signing up sheet somewhere where you can leave your email if you want to stay in touch. And I hope many of you do. The substance use inventory, which we're primarily responsible for, has three main purposes. The first one is to generate accurate and robust data about actual patterns of substance use by young people. Lots of those who work in particular agencies have a very skewed picture because those are the kind of young people that get referred to their agency. The general public, if there is such a thing, knows that young kids are taking drugs all the time, they're taking all sorts of drugs and it's a massive problem and it's completely out of control. Everybody's got an opinion on it. What we needed is robust data on what young people are actually doing in respect of substances. So the inventory aims to do that by accessing, and Rachel will go into more details in a minute, whole school populations. The value of that is in terms of HYPE specifically, which is the second objective, is that information can then inform the focus of the HYPE training. If we know, for example, that alcohol is the major problem, then, as you heard from the pupils in Olchfa, they take alcohol very seriously as part of their HYPE programme. If it was something else, we'd be able to identify that something else. And so HYPE can be sensitised to the local needs of individual schools in terms of what the training comprises. And also, as Julian was saying, the inventory, as it's developed over time, helps us to help schools show what kind of impact the programme might be having. We do provide confidential reports to the schools on each individual school's pattern of substance use. Schools don't find out from us about individual pupils. We have very complicated data protection arrangements to make sure that names and data are kept separate. But each school gets an anonymised report about the substance use patterns within its school at each level. And the SMAT doesn't even see that. That only goes to that individual school. As well as an aggregate report, which is shared with the SMAT and with all other schools. And I think pretty much anybody else who wants a copy of it can have access to that now. So HYPE, the substance use inventory contributes to evaluating and evidencing the impact that HYPE is having on patterns of substance use by young people in secondary schools. Thirdly, the inventory is there to, and this is really the primary focus of Rachel's PhD, to add to our knowledge of the phenomenon of substance use by young people. There isn't, in actual fact, a great deal of research which explores patterns and the kind of linkages between different types of substance use, whether there's a progression from one substance to another. There's research which focuses on small numbers of young people, but nothing which really looks at large populations, and that's what our research aims to do. And that's important because it helps us to contextualise the nature of substance use by young people. I've used the word, or the phrase, substance use for the last 2 or 3 minutes that I've been speaking. Others have spoken about substance misuse or drugs, which comes with an even bigger kind of baggage if you say the word drugs. I think it's important for us to recognise, for example, from the research, that alcohol, as Rachel will show you, is clearly the substance that young people are most frequently using. But it's pejorative to suggest that that's misuse. It's very difficult and not necessarily appropriate to give young people the message, don't drink alcohol, because it's bad for you when they see adults going out getting drunk and enjoying a glass of wine over dinner. So I think without labouring the point, without being too controversial, I would just say that part of our role in conducting the research and in terms of this deeper understanding of substance use is to get a better perspective on use, misuse, what is actually happening in the real lives of young people. And if we can generate that kind of knowledge, that then goes back to feeding our first objective, which is to improve the kind of knowledge of substance use by young people, and then we can improve the training. So this is a kind of a virtuous cycle of knowledge, hopefully. I've probably said enough, haven't I?
Stolen all my thunder now.
I haven't at all, because you've got all the details to talk about. So I'll hand over to Rachel, and she'll tell you a bit more about how we do the inventory and the kind of things that we're finding.
Okay, so to start with, we'll just talk about a bit more what the inventory is and how it works, and then we'll move on to some of the findings, the most recent findings that we've got. So it started in 2008. We've done 4 complete academic years because we run on the school year of data collection. We're in the 5th year now. We started off in 4 secondary schools, but we're in 5 secondary schools currently. The data goes to the SMAT and to the schools, like Kevin said. It's used to strengthen the HYPE programme because they know which drugs the kids need to teach the other kids about, and just to help so people actually know what's going on. There isn't really any large-scale quantitative research in Wales. There's the smoking, drinking and drug use survey for England, but that's not for Wales. And the British crime survey starts at 16. So there's nothing on sort of secondary school age kids really. Too keen there. So the research questions that the inventory covers is prevalence of use, so have young people ever used a substance? Recency of use, so how recently was their last episode of substance use? And then frequency of use, so the number of times they've used it. So there's 2 slides. It's done on a PowerPoint like this. This is how the sessions are run. All the kids sit in sort of an assembly, and then it comes up. Each drug comes up with 2 questions. So that's the recency question. So the kids will get asked. So when in the last 12 months did you use alcohol? So we only ask about the last 12 months because they do the survey every year. So it's sort of a rolling data collection. And then the second question they get asked is frequency. So the number of times they've used alcohol in the last 12 months. And then young people that say they've used alcohol in the last day and they've used it 10 times, they'll be given as a user. So we count them to work out the prevalence figures. So we don't have a separate prevalence question. We work it out from the recency and frequency. And because they have to answer consistently both questions, it just helps with sort of reliability of the results in case they're not paying attention. They answer it using a little handset, so using turning point or leapfrog handsets. So that means we can do a lot of kids at once. Then, like Julian was saying, there isn't much time to get into school, so using this means we can do about 150 kids at once, which makes it a lot less burdensome for the schools. And it also makes it a lot easier because the data gets put straight into Excel. There's no danger of me miscopying the answers out from a paper questionnaire. So that's the list of the substances that we've got in the inventory. So it's the sort of standard list you probably get in most drug surveys. We added research chemicals 2 years ago when methadone started coming out. And a new one for last academic year was unknown substance, so that the kids had taken something but they weren't sure what they were taking. And that was useful in 2 ways, because it stopped them guessing what they thought they'd taken. So they might have thought they'd taken amphetamines, but they'd taken ecstasy, or they might have bought something, but they didn't know what they were taking. And also just to see how risky their behaviour is if they're just taking stuff but they don't know what they're taking. We have a dummy substance as well, just again to check if they're paying attention, or if they're trying to be sneaky and say they use everything, so we can take them out of the analysis. This big table is just really to show how the inventory's grown. So in the first year, we only had year 8s in it. And in the second year, the year 8s were year 9s, so we moved on, and we added the new year 8s. And then, again, the next year and the final year so far. So we followed the kids all the way through school, compulsory schooling, to see how their substance use changes. Because the substance use inventory is longitudinal, we track individual substance use on an individual level, anonymously, so lots of passwords and things. So we can see how individuals' use changes over time, but we only look at it by male or female and year group. We don't identify it in any other more detailed way than that. So you can see we've got over 2,000 young people last year, and there'll be more this year probably too. So to start with some of our findings, so this is last year's results, so 2011, 2012, the prevalence of substance use. So this is the percentage of young people that used any of these substances in the last 12 months, just the last 12 months. So you can see that by far and away that alcohol is the most prevalent substance for all year groups. And then we've got sort of tobacco and cannabis coming up there too. I can't say too much about the unknown substance because it's the first year we've got data for yet, so we don't know, I mean, if the patterns will stay the same or not for this year coming. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to that. But you can see, as well as alcohol being the most common for all year groups, substance use prevalence in general is more prevalent among older young people. So it's, although everyone's using, year 11's using more than year 8's. Okay, so I've taken 2 of the most common substances and then I just picked a random one of the less common substances just to show you the recency and frequency data that we can use. So this is alcohol, so the recency of alcohol use in the last 12 months. So this is just the young people that said they use alcohol are in this. So you can see that most use is more distant than recent. So although people are using, they tend to be using sort of further away. So they're not using today, they're not using yesterday, sort of thing. So it's sort of declining recency of use. But you can see that for the older young people, so year 11s, it's more common to use it more recently, so they're probably using it more recently than younger year 8s as well. And then we looked at tobacco, just to see if anything different came up, because again, that's one of the more prevalent substances. So for this, we can see a slightly different pattern. The past 24 hours is a bit higher, so it seems that maybe there's young people that are kind of addictive users, so more ingrained use, and then the people that are just trying it maybe once in the last year, but it's not become like a proper habit yet, maybe. Then we just picked a random one, so we just picked amyl nitrates. So all the substances outside of alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, and gas-going solvents be used by less than 6% of all year groups for all substances, and amyl nitrate was one of them. But this was just to show a bit about the danger of just looking at the stats, because for the year 10s, each young person represents 10%, because there's only 10 young people said they'd used it in the last year. But we still see the same sort of pattern, sort of that use is more distant than recent, except for year 9s, which seem to have all used it in the last day, which means the session might be on a Monday morning, so it might fall on a weekend, which could skew the results a little bit. And they obviously look more skewed because 1,000 kids are saying they use alcohol, so the graph looks nice and neat, and this one looks all jerky because we've got 9 in year 8 said they'd used it, so that's why it looks a bit more disjointed. And then we start to look at frequency. So a nice neat graph for this one. So you can see that most young people, even those that are using alcohol, which is the most prevalent substance, they're only really using it 1 to 5 times. That's the most likely response that they gave. So it's not, although it's common, they're not using it every day, they're not using it every week. Although you can see that declines as they get older, and that more frequent use becomes more common the older they get. So you can see a pattern between the two groups there. In respect of tobacco, you can see it's slightly different. Again, we've probably got a group at the end, on the more than 25, that might be sort of what you'd class as like a smoker, so they're doing it every week or every day, rather than just in the 1 to 5 category. They just tried it a couple of times maybe, but they're not a heavy smoker. So you can see there's two extremes really for tobacco. They're either a trier or they may be a user, I guess you could say. And then we looked at amyl nitrate too, just to show you the kind of weird disjointed patterns that come out sometimes when we look at the substance use for less common substances. But you can see the general pattern sort of still there, that 1 to 5 is most common, and then more than 25 it spikes for year 9s. So maybe something happened in year 9, I'm not sure, but they seem keen on the amyl nitrates from the random stats. But again, there was only year 9s. There's only 21 said they'd used it in the last year, so that's why it looks a bit wonky. Okay, so the other way that we can consider the data from the inventory is by looking across the different cohorts. So at the moment we've got 4 complete cohorts of year 8 data. So cohort 1 was year 8 in 2008, 2009, and then 9, 10, 10, 11, and cohort 4 was in year 8 in 2011, 2012. So there's the same or similar age young people, sort of age 12 to 13, but they were year 8s at different times. So you can still see that alcohol is still the most common substance reported, followed by sort of gas and then tobacco. But you can see that there's differences between the cohorts. So although alcohol is the most prevalent, it's not used at the same rate, even among similar aged kids in similar years, quite close together. So that we can't always estimate what's going to happen. And then the other way, the final way, and maybe the most useful way we've got to look at the data is the same kids. So cohort 1 started the inventory in 2008 and 2009, and they've completed it 4 times. They're not in the survey anymore because they finished compulsory education. So these are the changes in use for the same kids. So we can see that alcohol, again, as I said before, is the most common, most prevalent substance, but that still increases year on year as they get older. The inverse is true of the gas, fuel and solvents. That seems to go down as they get older. And then the tobacco and cannabis also, it seems to rise, except for the unknown substance, because we've only got 1 year of that, so I don't want to say too much of it. All the other substances are used by less than 5% from all the data collection suites, 8, 9, 10 and 11 by cohort 1. So it really is those substances up at the far end. They're the most prevalent ones, and the other ones we don't get a lot of responses for. So to conclude then, so we can say that most young people have used something in the last 12 months. There's a general pattern of declining recency of use. So use is generally not in the last 24 hours last week. It's further away than that. Most substances have been used 1 to 5 times, although there is a sort of a growing-ish minority using it more than 25 times, which could be showing a pattern of more problematic use rather than just trying it once or twice. Different cohorts of the same age people, but different young people, report different weights of prevalence. So we can't always assume that year 8s are going to be using 20% of this or that. And that alcohol is by far and away the most prevalent substance that's used from all year groups, all cohorts, of all our data collection suites so far. Do we have questions? Anyone have any questions now at the end?
Take questions after.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of information to take in. We're going to now move to Jenny, who's making his way down here. Jenny has been with the place since it started. The place is known for the Children and Young People's Substance Misuse Service in Swansea. In common with much of what we do through the SMAT, the funding is a mix of both government, local partner agencies, and anything from Square and anywhere else. But this is a piece of work I think that as a commissioning board we are particularly proud to achieve. Because if we go back just a few years in Swansea, there really was no special place that young people could go to, where they could receive advice, support or guidance without adult abusers being present. And in setting this up, it was the first service of its type created in Wales. So we're very pleased to have Jamie here, and I think Jamie's going to try and talk to some of the threshold issues as we move, not just looking at the issues of Tier 1 and education information, but also looking about the needs of that smaller but very needy group of young people that we do enter into the domain of treatment rather than simply providing information. Jamie.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm just going to give you an overview, first of all, about the history of Swansea Drugs Project in the place. It kind of all started off with regards, as Eddie alluded to earlier on, about young people accessing inappropriate services which were predominantly attended by adults. And there was a report then put together for best practice with working with young people called the House Report, being a bit biased, which was put together by one of my favourite individuals that works in the field, Irish Gilbari, and also Alana Crow. It was quite unique, and it still stands the test of time today. So it's still quite a good document to kind of fall back on with regards to good practice for services for young people. So what was excellent was that we were able to have the backing of documentation which government were putting forward to say good practices for young person services to stand alone, which was great for us involved in the youth service provisions. So when this happened, what we were starting to see was an influx of young people attending the services and coming through and using the service to their best advantages. But what we were finding was that we were working very much in isolation, trying to be jack of all trades basically, and trying to provide provision that we were trying to be everything to everyone. And sometimes that was at detriment to the service provisions that were out there already in existence to those individuals that were attending our service. So what we started to see and what we started to develop was we had a cohort of very problematic young people with very high needs, and their substance misuse issues were very high. For example, I'll give you some kind of case studies. Individuals coming to us who were IV injecting heroin users, who were sex working, who were under the age of 18, and that's just the beginning of it. Not to mention the welfare issues with income and homelessness, which attributed to many other factors, as well as co-occurring issues such as mental health as well. So we were trying to kind of, encompass all these kind of issues that they were presenting with and trying to solve them out one by one, but also trying to prioritise them at the same time, which is sometimes difficult when someone is living on the street and you're also trying to kind of alleviate the impact of substance misuse. So what we had to look at was the prioritising, obviously housing would be the priority, and then looking at the substance misuse issue secondary. So these individuals were, young people were attending our service, and it was great that they were having a service which was bespoke to their needs. But what we started to do then, and it's not a particularly nice word to use, but what we started to see was the ghettoisation of these young people. They started, forming a real reliance on our service and wouldn't attend other services. And we kind of felt half guilty in kind of empowering that to happen. So what we started to look at were ways and means of developing a more proficient service, utilising the provision of other services out there and getting us working multi-agency basically. So what we started to look at was basically the demographics of our service users. And one of the major barriers or hurdles that we were commonly being confronted with from young people and professionals was access to a provision. Because of the stigma attached to the substance misuse, young people were either not keen on coming to our service because of possibly what they saw, the majority of our service users being heroin users, and they didn't have a heroin issue. But also what we saw was that professionals also kind of saw that, and as we were the more higher ends kind of dealing with those kind of young people. And we wanted to kind of be, as we said, everything to everyone. So we started working with those individuals on what we call a tier 3, a high threshold, more treatment intervention. And that started back about 4 years ago. And we saw some really good impact and success stories with some of those individuals whose needs were extremely high and needed that tier 3 provision and intervention, which is more a medicalised model, with also then the wraparound services that we could put in place with our multi-agency approach that we were doing. But what we kind of sat down and kind of spoke about was that we were always kind of firefighting. We were dealing with the top end, but we weren't doing very much with the bottom end, with the education and prevention. So we kind of sat down and kind of looked at the work that we were doing and how we were delivering it. And what we came up with was that we needed to get out there and needed to get out there to a wider audience. And that audience included the young people, obviously, that fitted the remit of the services, but also families as well, parents, carers, grandparents. And how did we do that? And what we decided to do was start to try and get into schools. Initially, we were confronted with quite a bit of cold shoulder, to be perfectly honest with you, because of the approach that we were trying to develop. And what the issue that we found was that the harm reduction approach wasn't really accepted in the ways that we were trying to promote our provision, and there was a lack of understanding of the harm reduction approach. So what we had to look at, and we looked at the Welsh Government that published guidance prior to 2011, but the same messages are constantly being delivered right through to 2011, and it meant developing and maintaining an effective policy. So we were starting from scratch. So as Julian alluded to earlier on, we had to kind of sell ourselves and package it quite sexily, to be perfectly honest with you, so people would accept it. Good practice in substance misuse education. We've got the practical experiences to be able to show our knowledge base and our evidence-based practice in which it impacts on our service provision, and also how we manage substance-related incidents, which we kind of sold on the fact that, look, if you've got any, which a lot of schools were saying that they didn't have any issues with substance misuse in some of the schools, but if there was, we'd be able to work in confidentiality with these schools and support the individuals and their families. And also offer them, which also coincided then with the additional sources of support. So going back to harm reduction, this is how then we kind of sold it, and how the messages that we were trying to get across to the individuals. Because what the argument that we were trying to say was that harm reduction was recognised by the UK, the UNCC Rights of the Child. However, if you looked at the packaging of it, from harm reduction abstinence, and being a parent, I would definitely prefer the abstinence approach, being to just say no. But what we know is that that isn't the most appropriate approach to it. So the harm reduction was trying to see how we would word it with regards to encompassing the message that we would be delivering to young people. And also then the schools asking the questions, but how are you going to give young people the information which is about drugs when you're not telling them to not use drugs? And what we were trying to say, that it's going to be a balanced approach. So we would be giving them, and we're not going to be naive about the fact that young people, as it was said earlier on, will experiment with substances at some point in their lives. But at the same time, what we need to do is be able to give them the information so they make that conscious decision whether or not they go ahead and use. But more importantly, because we were coming from like the psychosocial side of things, and also taking into consideration adolescents, what we had to look at was the development skills of, say, self-reflection or self-efficacy. So being able to give them the individual skills where they can look at themselves and think about the way they feel, the way they act, and the way they behave. Now, we're not born with those skills. And in our sessions, that's the skills that we try to promote, which is really, really important in relation to being confronted with risky behaviours or acting impulsively as some individuals do. So for good practice then, what we were looking at, and as Julian has said earlier on as well, was that pupils are actively involved in policy development and peer involvement in the programme of work, which is the ethos basically of the HIDE programme. And one of the really good examples I can give you, going back to when this is an in-house project, there was an initiative back a few years ago, which was what we're starting to see in Wales was the increase in opiate-related deaths Now, there was a programme of work which was delivered in pilot areas in Wales, and they delivered the naloxone, which is the antidote to opiate. And what we started doing was delivering sessions to young people. Now, the administration of this, because it's a controlled medicine, to be able to prescribe it, you have to be over 16. So I'm talking post-16, but it's still school age. So what we were doing were peer-led sessions in the delivery and the administration of this substance. And I think it was within the first 5 or 6 months of this pilot scheme being initiated, the first 5 incidents of this actually being recorded where young people actually used it on another user, whether it be an adult or fellow peer. And that to me kind of showed how important that peer involvement was in our work. And what we started to do then was develop programs of, I've just mentioned about self-efficacy, other users, service users, giving individuals and telling them how to use those skills about utilising reflection, and how that could benefit them in their lives from day-to-day interactions where they feel they've been compelled to use substances. Staff support and involvement. One of the main things that we did want to do was kind of tread on any toes. So what we were offering was a support as a central resource. So if any school teachers or anything wanted to, and they felt quite passionately, which they do, about, say, the topic of substance misuse, we didn't want to come in and say that we wanted to take over. What we wanted to be there was a resource to be able to provide them with new information, new resources, and be more than happy to support that. Access to appropriate and local information and sources of support. Basically, that's what we're on the doorstep, and we're dealing with a lot of families, and what we've got already is a lot of demographic information around, and we because what we've seen in Swansea is a lot of generational substance misuse. We potentially work with mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, so we've got a lot of information to kind of be able to act upon. So it kind of breaks down those barriers sometimes. One of the major things from us is having the parents, carers involved, and kind of, because that's where a lot of our work with regards to mediatory situations with young people who are sometimes using, or parents are using, and how they impact one another. And then on a more kind of involved with the schools issue is that the governors are well informed and supportive of this policy and well-planned programs of study which we deliver in the school. So all that is kind of all combines into kind of supporting our provision which we deliver. Also involving appropriate outside agencies and having guidelines of their involvement. What we do find, and what we did find at the very beginning, was that schools were just more than happy for us to come in and deliver, and to be perfectly honest, we could have delivered anything. They wouldn't have known either way. But as we've developed over time, is to be able to set aside those more professional-looking packages, having teaching sessions, having individuals join the team who have a teaching background, and those things have really complemented our provision. And ensuring that the content of the delivery is planned and complies with school policy, and is evaluated and work is followed up in schools. So that continuation of the work that we have, and also that opportunity for consultation afterward. So what we've got then is the possibilities, and what we're aiming for are the learning outcomes. And that should be that pupils should take increasing responsibility for keeping themselves safe and healthy, feel positive about themselves, and be sensitive towards the feelings of others. And that goes back to the quote that I've got at the beginning about harm reduction and taking in the views of how substance misuse doesn't discriminate within a society. And also what we have then is to understand the features of the emotional and physical benefits of healthy lifestyle, the harmful effects of both to themselves and to others, that's of tobacco, alcohol and other legal and illegal substances. And what to do or who to go to when feeling unsafe or unsure. That's a kind of generic kind of thing, because that's what we managed to do, and I'm kind of jumping back a bit now because we've got to this point, is that when I was talking about that we had a single point of service, access to service for assessment and referral, what we've managed to create now, we had a space, as I said, people were willing to come to us, but we've managed to move into now a youth provision, which is information on Kingsway, and basically that's the demographic has changed completely. We're seeing more young people accessing our services from a range of different parts of our community, and we're seeing age difference as well, because what we predominantly work those the upper end from, say 16 to 18/19. Now we're kind of getting a much broader range, and also children included, and families are feeling more comfortable in coming to a service such as ours. And the anonymity aspect of it, if you go into information, if you know information, it has a facade, it's on a, it's on a very busy shopper's walk, and you can go in and no one will ever know what you're going in there. However, you could be going in there for having sexual health screening, generic counselling, substance misuse, or a bus timetable, or just to access the internet. So it's really important that we kind of start moving with the times, and like what we're looking at now is moving on to the future, because what we're seeing as well as within the drugs field is how much social media is playing in part of delivering information to young people in particular, and how involved young people are with social media. And what we see is there's a lot of forums within substance misuse, and this goes back to the kind of peer-led stuff, and how harm reduction information from user to user, and how the social media is playing a huge important part in that. And we deliver a separate kind of training session on that, particularly to professionals. But just to kind of give you a snippet, the outreach, you know, when you go into these forums and you can see the links and how many views it's about the use of new and emerging drugs or alcohol, we're talking hundreds and thousands of individuals are seeing it, and that's the kind of remit that we would like to get back in Swansea and in the surrounding areas as well. So that's the kind of profile that we're trying to get to, and the use of social media in regards to the schools, our profile getting out there, because there's a lot of discussion, a lot of arguments as well to say what is the impact on education, PSE education in schools, and are the young people actually being responding to it. To me, if they do, absolutely fantastic, we've kind of got to go it, but if they don't, at least we're able to kind of get out there and get that exposure to the young people, that if they ever did need to have a service such as that, hopefully they would remember that they came into contact with a big scary drugs worker, and then we kind of broke down those kind of barriers and those taboos. I'm not that big, I'm not that scary, Rob is, but you know, then that's what we want to be able to do, is break down those barriers, because the biggest substance misusing population that we have are recreational drug users, and we see a small minority of those drug users, and what we want to be able to do is break down those barriers, because those individuals are teaching on the edge of maybe going the right way and not using again, or potentially going another route of more problematic substance misuse. And in the meantime, what we want to be able to do is get that kind of individual in, to ask those right questions, to be able to plant the seed, to get them in the right direction. Maybe not now, but maybe in the future. But maybe our goal is to avoid them becoming adult services, you know, involved adult services, and potentially becoming being part of the system. So we want to avoid that. Thank you.
I think after that tour de force, we better let Kate's breath. Thanks, Julian. Okay, that's the end of our formal presentation, but obviously we wanted this to not just be about throwing everything out at you, but also give you the opportunity to ask questions as well. So we've reached that point where it's question time. No questions, comments, issues, concerns?
You know what I'll be doing to when you've got, do you ask why young people use? I know that Julian said about recreational, and I get that, but has there been any delving into other why people use alcohol or drugs? I know it's readily available, it's termed as illegal high and all that kind of thing, but to get more to the nitty-gritty of the emotional side of things, are those questions asking those questions? Why people use it?
The issue with the quantitative data that we collect is that we have to fit within what schools can cope with. So, as Rachel was saying, she's doing 150 pupils in the confines of a 14-minute lesson, and that's getting them in, getting them to do it, and getting them out again, ready for the next lesson. So, the quantitative data is limited to just the questionnaire, which is just about the frequency and the recency of use. So there's no large-scale why questions going on. It's just what questions at that level. But as part of Rachel's PhD, she's been working with some focus groups of young people in the schools that are attempting to explore some of the why questions. It's with a much smaller sample. And it's largely with those who are just doing it on a voluntary basis, isn't it? I think it's those that are coming forward that say they want to talk about these sorts of issues. So, I mean, no in terms of the large-scale data, yes in terms of a small-scale qualitative study. That's not being routinely reported to anybody at the moment. I mean, Rachel needs to finish her PhD. Other PhD students will have heard that as well. They need to finish their PhDs, but she needs to finish that, and then it'll be made available because that'll become a public document. And we'll aim to do something more with that then. But it's not been a major focus of what we've done.
You want to add to that, Jack? Because a lot of the youngsters that we've worked with have taken part in publicising some of the issues as they see it as well. Giving people quite a strong voice to talk to.
Absolutely. I think what's happened is that it's led on to more kind of develop more like the peer development groups that we've got now that are bringing youngsters through to be able to give that information or sharing that experience. It's that going back to that self-efficacy, those skills that they've kind of learned through potentially being involved with agencies, and then kind of passing on those skills to those other individuals to continue the kind of cycle and passing it right through down to other young people that are coming through. That answers your question.
Jamie, can I ask? I'm really interested in looking at different mediums to give education and help to young people on a general theme. Now I'm thinking about, you did a video many years ago about a young woman and a young man on the streets and having some real difficulties, but have you done anything recently on current drug use with young people on a video or anything that we could use as an educational practice?
What we've developed over the past couple of years is that story wasn't part. We were involved in it, but it wasn't from us. It was to do with other things. But what we use is other media sources such as what's it called? Stop-start animation we used. We looked at the substance misuse in relation to benzodiazepines and bringing upon then service users to develop the short animation and then bring it, in a comedy kind of style, but also then delivering poignant facts in between to kind of get that information across. Other sources that we've been able to develop is, and particularly with our kind of transition clients who are just going into adult services, where they're developing podcasts and they're discussing kind of, the up-to-date kind of the discussions or topical discussions around new and emerging drugs or legal highs, as they're also known about new and emerging drugs. But what we're looking at and trying to develop, which we have meetings coming up in the coming months, is the social media aspect and how we can utilise the likes of Facebook. And this isn't, it isn't the eureka moment, because there's lots of services out there which are using these kind of social media. But it's how we in Swansea can capitalise on that. We might be a little bit behind, but we can learn from others' mistakes and maybe develop a very good system in place. But such things like, because Information, for instance, where we're located, are currently on Facebook and utilise open forums. So what we have are slots, say 12 o'clock, where if you had a message or a query over Facebook, you could ask the professional, say from the substance misuse field, and the professional will try then to signpost, give the correct and up-to-date information. But it's taking that to another level and allowing it to kind of grow and develop more. So the use of text messages and things like that are also another form. It's not massive science thing, but it just adds to that element of our service. But yeah, the use of social media, Twitter, all that alike, which we're hoping to develop further.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about practitioner tools really in general, about how we can actually make use of these things. Because if you have something that's culturally sensitive in your own area, you're more likely to hook into it and take the messages on board, really.
I think some of the recently we've been delivering the new and emerging drugs, particularly methadone sections, and you know they're short but very informative, like 3-hour sessions, which people can fit into their working day instead of taking 1 day, 2 days out, and then we kind of splatter them across the calendar, and I think within 3 or 4 days we put out 6 or 7 sessions. They were already full, and we would do like 30 people plus attending. So we were informing practices, but we go into a lot of detail around what we're seeing in Swansea locally, but what's also presenting nationally, and sharing that information, and also sharing good practice then with other professionals, and opening that opportunity for dialogue as well, where people can share their experiences, because you know we're not going to see everything, because we do a lot of kind of peer work ourselves and learning off one another. And one of the main things that we've kind of started to do as drugs workers in the field is using the social media, the forums that are on the internet, that we kind of are on, which we are learning off other drug users nationally that are putting out that information there, and then kind of bearing anything, just any similarities within the Swansea area. So, as I said, once again, social media, all that, and those kind of opportunities to be able to share that information as well.
Do you have any newsletters that come out on a regular basis that might tell us about when the podcasts are coming out and stuff like that?
We have a newsletter which is Up to Speed, which comes out how often? Quarterly. So that will come out through the SMAT. The podcast, off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the link I have to give, but I can for sure get that information. They don't just talk about substance misuse, alcohol and things like that. So it's very mixed.
It sounds like a sort of integrative approach, and with this good information, it's fantastic, and I'm really impressed with how the services have been developing. And we're wondering what the next steps might be, and whether young people, families that have been working through the place have identified gaps themselves in vision in the community, and what people say that you're working with, the same stresses and strains are from their perspective.
I think what's been really beneficial of our service evolving as it has is that opportunity to work with not just the individual but as a family as a whole, and I think having that welcoming environment and having the diversity in the teams and the individuals within those teams, and being able to work with the parents, carers and the young person alike, and all the other offshoot services and partners that we work with, to provide that holistic service, and not just saying it tokenistic, but it does happen. I think that's what is definitely kind of
I think people have identified that themselves as
I think what we're presenting today is the work that we're doing around schools. There's another strand of work entirely, which is looking at issues about how we work with families, and particularly how we deal with issues of hidden harm and young children and parents who've got substance misuse problems, which is certainly worthy of doing another day, and it wouldn't really be fitting to get into it all today. But these two things do mesh together, and really joint our responsibility for both of those strands. Now, Julian's back, and I think we can't emphasise enough really how important it is that we start quite young. Certainly some of the more innovative work that we're doing at the moment is designed to youngsters and their families where they're actually in junior schools. Jem's sitting here in the third row, and we've just done a short cartoon which we will be making use of with schools across Swansea, which looks at the dangers of needles young people in public areas. And the whole issue was raised by a young person as something that they felt concerned, something which we were then able to turn into a very owned piece of work by 3 young girls and make it happen. So the whole thing is their piece of work. We've enabled them to do it. But hopefully when it goes out. One of those things that generates a safety first message for other young people. And it's that sort of methodology that we're really trying to get into. Yes, we do have, still a large problem of drug deaths and heroin use of adults, but I think everything that we've tried to present today, showing how we're trying to get in front of that, actually create some prevention strategy and early intervention strategy that will hopefully prevent young people becoming problematic users in the future. So, do you have any more questions?
It's more of those.
Sorry.
I was just following on from that, because it feels as though we've had a very reassuring picture about what's happening in the sort of substance use world in Swansea, which seems a little bit at odds to what, to the picture that we've had over the last few years, that actually it's an enormous problem in Swansea and we really need to be panicking. I just wonder if you can help to sort of reconcile those different points of view.
Okay.
I think one of the big things that we've seen is what we've got around is the change in drug cultures as well. Because if you go back 6 years ago and we talked about the issues that we were being faced with young people and their heroin use, what we got now is a very different scene. Our prescribing service at its height was prescribing up to 20 young individuals methadone for treatment for opiate use, and slowly but gradually, as we were coinciding with developing the prevention arm to our work, not saying this was solely the reason for the decrease in that, but what we saw were the changes in young people's attitudes towards that substance. But then what we've seen is then the rise of methadone, meow, and how that has increased now. So it's kind of difficult to be able to answer that question with the changes of culture, with the austerity measures which have been placed on services, and services, new ones reappearing, other ones disappearing. But I think it's a positive, and it's difficult to be able to say that we are ever going to win the fight against drugs because of substance misuse. But I think what we're seeing is better practice, better reporting, better partnership working, and I think that's quite a positive thing for us to be able to promote that. We always hear about the bad, we always hear about the negatives, from where media angles and media, but it's always sometimes nice then to be reassured from the positive side as well, that there are lots of good practice out there, and there are lots of good pieces of work happening. And we've got the HYPE programme, the place, the peer mentors, the smiley faced Avengers, who are doing these really good pieces of work, and I don't think they get the publicity that they deserve, and maybe we should be putting them more on the pedestal and saying, look, this is what's happening, and we're not going to rescue everyone, but with those individuals that we do get an opportunity to be engaged with, then hopefully they will benefit. Maybe not be able to reap the benefits now, but maybe in the future we will see it by planting that seed.
I think that the positive picture that you're describing is entirely down to the research. I might be slightly biased in forming that opinion, but I do think, as I said at the beginning, the sort of media representation is of a huge problem. We wouldn't deny, none of us would deny, and the research doesn't suggest that substance use is not a problem. But what it does is it begins to quantify the nature of that problem. And as Gemma was saying, the biggest issue is with casual use, whether it be of alcohol or other substances. And that's clearly something that Rachel's data evidence with the kind of tall peaks at this end of the graphs, and that reinforces the importance for the SMAT and for the other agencies, because it is not just the SMAT, it's a lot of other providers as well, on the prevention side, on the education side, which is why we think that the work around HYPE has been so important and so valuable. But then there are also a smaller number of young people that are developing, as some of the Rachel's graphs at the other end show, problematic use. And for that reason, you can't just focus on one part of the provision. You've got to look at the range of provision, and that's something that, as Eddie and Jeremy explained, is also part of this programme of work too. It's, today's the emphasis is on the sort of prevention side and working with schools, but there's a lot of other work going on with youngsters who are on the cusp of or are actually demonstrating problematic use, where it becomes a problem for them in their lives and possibly them then creating problems for others. So I think because of the research, there's a more rational approach to this delivery. And we've got a better picture of what's going on.
I think one of the other things that we've worked very hard on is actually training people. That issue about the cultural impact you can't minimise, but that culture also goes across agencies and it goes across individual workers. With the staff development programme that we've managed to roll out over the last few years, we've brought people together. I think we've narrowed the distance between people so that we've actually built up more of a culture of working together and trust. I think that's been very critically important in this. There's still a heck of a long way to go though, there's no doubt about it. And the danger of this, as everybody would agree, I think, is that when we think we've got on top of dealing with one particular substance issue, another one comes along. The one thing that's really been consistent all the way through, not aided in any way at all by national government on this, is alcohol. A few years ago, they commissioned a report from their own advisory group on substance misuse, which reported back with a document called Pathways to Problems that identified alcohol as the dominant gateway for young people and showed the importance of dealing with tobacco cessation. But because of the vested interests of the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry at that time, the government wouldn't even attend the publication of its own report. It had to take place in a non-government building. So when we see vested interest taking such a sharp disinterest in the well-being of young people, then I think we do have to ask some serious questions about this and its.
Can I just say as well, Eddie, just to go back to your original question, I don't think the two positions are mutually exclusive, to be honest. I think there is tremendous work going on in terms of education and prevention, and there is still a concern about substance misuse. I think the two go hand in hand. They're not exclusive positions in which one will lead to deterioration and the other, or vice versa.
What we are seeing is a bigger increase in people accessing our service, but however presenting with less problematic, more coming when there's experimental use, whereas previously more people were attending, but less concentration, but with much higher, much greater needs and riskier behaviours.
And we don't have the waiting lists that we used to have for people getting to see people for advice or for entering into treatment. We actually get on top of the waiting list. So we've only been able to do that because we've had significant extra funding from both government. They do deserve a great deal of credit for policy, for what it actually is, how it's written, and for how it's actually delivered. And I hope that we'll be able to say that they continue to do the right thing over the next few years. But time for one last question, really, I think.
Well, it's not social when at the end of the last century, can I say that, we were in a position where youth drugs were not even acknowledged in this area. I think the distance we travelled, it's been a bit painful at times, has been tremendous. When we talked before about the House report coming out, we launched a conference, two-day conference at that stage, trying in Swansea to look at a range of a tiered approach to how we can look at substance misuse in Swansea. I'm just to be part of that whole process that we were achieving it. We don't get complacent, and I think that was evident in how we responded quite quickly to the developments of Meow. Before, probably a few years down the line, but by several different approaches coming together, that certainly served the purpose. There is a conference next year on emerging drugs, get our terminology is right, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it's the range of provisions we've got now, absolutely tremendous, from listening to the students in the front. I've got to say, the fabulous people in front of me who are the smiley face offenders, Billy, who's taken on to train staff via this group to actually see what the reality is of leaving care and the work they've done with that, because that's very much an area that the young people will come back into over the drug services. all the work that the police have been doing with all different elements, you know, and the youth offending service in amongst all that, harnessing some of those things as well. Fantastic, and I can only just say it's really lovely part of it. And congratulations to you all, but it's a great range.
Okay, well,
You'll get your £10 afterwards, yeah. It's gone up, is it more? Is it more than 10? Oh no. We've blown the budget. You can have an extra cup of coffee on the way out.
if there are no further questions, I think it falls to me to thank all our contributors today.